Good morning. My name is Greg Penner. I am a worship associate here. If I'm being honest, and I kind of think I'm supposed to be when I'm up here, it took me a long time to be able to talk to other people about my church. I would avoid the topic if I could, or I would preamble, making sure they knew I wasn't one of those church people, that my church was a good one. Does that sound a little judgy? Yeah. I never had a hard time coming to this church. I had a hard time coming out to others about coming to this church. And that says more about me than the people I was talking to. I worried if I told people in my very liberal life that I was going to church, they would think about me all the things that I thought about other people who talked about going to church. And I didn't always think nice thoughts about those folks or about the churches that they went to. I have some real problems with a lot of the religions in our world and with a lot of the people and how they follow them. So I kept quiet lest other people judge me the way I was judging them. If you're wondering how that squares with the UU principle about the inherent worth and dignity of all people, not so well. I wish I could say I had a revelatory moment in which I saw my hypocrisy, had a change of heart, and made a course correction, but I didn't. Not a revelatory moment, anyway. It was a gradual process. Over time, my church expanded to be a bigger and bigger part of me. Year after year of my whole self being welcomed here. Year after year of being inspired, of being connected to so many people doing so much good, of being held in the loving embrace of this community, and in my own way of holding others here in my embrace, my inhibitions lessened, and my willingness to be honest with others increased. I do remember one kind of aha moment. It was a Sunday in the summer of 2019, and I had just been elected moderator here. I was sitting in what was then my usual spot up there in the balcony, present, but a little distant. I looked out across the pews and I realized at a deeper level that this was my church, that my connections to this place and the people had grown deeper than I had realized, and that now I had taken on a serious responsibility to them too. I was all in with the Unitarian Universalist congregation at Willamette Falls. It's my goal these days to show up authentically wherever I go. So that means I need to show up as a church-going person. So now when someone asks me what I did this weekend, if church was a part of it, I share that. I do still have a little resistance to fully sharing my church life with others. It feels a little tender, sharing this part of my heart with people who might not value it the way that I do. But I believe in this church, in the good we create, in the love and joy that radiates out of this building, and I'm trying harder to let that radiate out of me too. In the process, I've softened my views of other church-going people. I still struggle with the harm I see other religions doing, but it's easier for me to see the good in people of faith, even if it's faith that I don't fully agree with. I didn't come to church much this summer. It's the first summer that I've lived with my partner, and I enjoyed many lazy Sundays at home with her and the dog. As the church year started, I felt a little resistance in coming back. But then I came here for a worship associate meeting and an RE teacher training, and I felt the pull. I felt the dust shaking off all of those connections, and I knew I was back where I wanted to be. Knew that this church, my spiritual home, where I sit in the pews with my congregation, where I teach our children and share myself from this pulpit, was the place for me. Tomorrow, if anyone asks me what I did over the weekend, I'll talk about the long dog walk, about hanging out with Pam, and about helping lead the service at my church.
Today's reading comes from Stanley Kunitz, from his poem, The Layers. I've walked through many lives, some of them my own, and I'm not who I was, though some principle of being abides, from which I struggle not to stray. When I look behind, as I am compelled to look before I can gather strength to proceed on my journey, I see the milestones dwindling toward the horizon and the slow fires trailing from the abandoned campsites, over which scavenger angels wheel on heavy wings. Oh, I've made myself a tribe out of my own true affections, and my tribe is scattered. How shall the heart be reconciled to its feast of losses? In a rising wind, the magic dust of my friends and those who fell along the way bitterly stings my face. Yet I turn, exulting somewhat, with my will intact to go wherever I need to go, and every stone on the road precious to me. In my darkest night, when the moon is covered and I roam through the wreckage of the nimbus-clouded voice which directed me, live in the layers, not on the litter. Though I lack the art to decipher it, no doubt the next chapter in my book of transformations is already written. I am not done with my changes. Well, I probably should have named this sermon "To Dream the Impossible Dream." That's what seminary is. And I have to tell you that when we get our reading lists for a semester, all you hear the students say is, "Whoa, yeah." When you attend seminary, you're asked several times and in many different ways to describe your spiritual journey. When you first applied to the UUA's ministerial credentialing office to become an aspirant for ministry, when you apply to one of the accrediting bodies to start your intern chaplaincy, when you prepare your packet for the ministerial fellowshipping committee, they determine whether you are ministerial material and okay you for preliminary fellowship, and in different ways and in different forms during the many classes that you take. All these are important, and each gives you a chance to review your life, the decisions you made, and with each opportunity to dig a little deeper. And just as you can never step into a moving river at the same place twice, your evolution through life reveals more of who you are and how you got to the place you presently stand in. I share this journey with you today so that you can know me better as I begin my learning from and with you as your ministerial intern. And because I'm a woman of a certain age, my journey will be longer than most, but I promise you I've edited this down to what I consider to be the most important parts, because I know from experience that there's a point where a long sermon can turn into a hostage situation. And we all have plans for later this week, I'm sure. So, I grew up 40 miles west of Chicago in a very small town between the suburbs and the farms. The population of my little town was about 1,500 people when I was born, and now stands at about 15,000. As you can imagine, we knew almost everyone, and my father, who had moved there as a young man 20-some-odd years before that, knew and was friendly with all of the old families. I was the middle child and the oldest girl of 3 surviving children. My brother's almost 9 years older than I, and my sister is 4 years younger. We lived on 3 acres of land with my paternal grandparents' house. They lived up on the hill behind us, about an acre up. This was a house. Our house was a house that my father and my uncle built for our family. We had the smallest amount of ground of any of the people in that neighborhood. The people to the north had 22 acres. The people to the south had 27. As a result, I ranged all over that property and our own and all of the neighbors' acreage with all of the other neighborhood children. We built forts and tree houses, rode our bikes everywhere. When my parents needed to call us in for dinner, my father would go out and lay on the car horn because that was the only way we would hear on all that acreage that it was time for dinner. I learned to love and live close to the land. And if you saw any of my pictures from that time, I looked like a little ragamuffin just off the boat from somewhere, dirty fingernails, ripped jeans, Band-Aids, and a long braid held down with a huge babushka. Just a warning here, there will be local Chicagoese kind of terms. Please see me after the service for translations. I grew up in a series of contradictions. My father was born and raised on a farm in the plains of Nebraska. My mother was raised on the south side of Chicago near the stockyards. My father was raised a Quaker, my mother a Roman Catholic. My father was a Republican, my mother a Democrat. Is it any wonder I became a Unitarian Universalist? It was far more interesting to grow up with two such different parents, and it taught me how to appreciate and talk to people of differing viewpoints, a skill that I think is much needed today. When I was ready to start first grade, the local Catholic church built a grade school. My mother wanted to enroll me, but my father thought paying for tuition when there was a perfectly good, free public school right down the street was a foolish waste of money. But he had promised my mother when they got married that he would raise us Catholic. But this didn't go over well, us going to Catholic school with my father, and my mother was adamant, so they did what they always did when they needed to have a discussion. They put us in front of the TV and turned the volume way up, and then they retreated to the farthest room of the house to talk it out. I started Catholic school that fall and stayed till 8th grade. When it was time for high school, my mother told me I had a choice of 3 different Catholic high schools. I told her I wanted to go to the local public school, and because my father's job was iffy at the time, he jumped in and supported me. I continued to go to Mass on Sunday. There was no question that I would, but it made me sad that we didn't go together as a family, since my father attended his own church and we weren't allowed to go with him. Even though I kept attending church and became involved with the co-ed Catholic teen group, I could feel myself pulling away and asking bigger questions about religion, mostly to myself because those questions would not have been welcome at home. I got my first call to ministry when I was at a weekend retreat for high school girls from many area parishes. I can't remember what happened that weekend that sparked all of this, but I do remember coming home feeling very different, more centered and solemn about my spirituality, whatever that was then. My mother noticed and asked me what changed for me, but I couldn't articulate it. I started wondering why women couldn't be priests, and knowing that I wanted a marriage and family one day, I knew that becoming a nun was not the life I wanted. When I became a feminist in college, I knew I couldn't stay in the church, although I went through the motions until I moved into my own apartment. Then I started my own search for truth and meaning. I began frequenting the local theosophical bookstore and reading books from many of the world's religions and schools of thought. I met a group of people who were dedicated to their own search, and we started discussing all these new ideas that were so new to me. I met people who believed in channeling and discarnate entities. Some were studying Buddhism, were Rosicrucians or Theosophists. Some believed in Shirley MacLaine. I studied therapeutic touch and the artist's way with their founders. This time was rich for me. I was in the midst of throwing out everything I knew and believed into a pile, and with all these new ideas and sifting through the layers of all of that to find out what fit. At this time, I was very involved in theater, spending a lot of my time when not working and reading all this new material, rehearsing and performing. I had been performing in one medium or another since I was 3 years old when I started ballet. Working in front of an audience was serious business for me. Even as young as I was, I remember that first recital when I was 3 at Club Hollywood in Chicago, and we were dancing. If that's what you call what 3-year-olds do. As you can imagine, the audience reacted with laughter, which made me furious. Hey, I'm working here. And I remember believing that even then. Why are they laughing at me? The desire to be taken seriously for my craft only increased as I danced into high school and then performed in school musicals. When I went to college, I majored in theater until I realized I really did need a marketable skill someday. Theater became my church, something I realized much later. Brian Cox, who played Logan Roy in Succession, said in an interview that he believes that theater is the one true church because it creates a personal and immediate experience. And that's what we try to do here every Sunday. And perhaps that is one of the things that drew me to it and pushed me to better my skills. It served as my church during those years, even when my acting turned to activism. That's when I traveled for 18 years with a one-woman show I wrote about the life of Margaret Sanger. My show, I realize now, was a sermon I delivered about the importance of reproductive rights for women. I always said I thought I could have traveled with that show forever, and those rights I thought would always be under attack. I'm sorry to say that I was right. One of the members of my theater company who was suffering from ALS passed away, and the company attended his memorial service at the local Unitarian Universalist church. At the beginning of this service, this tiny woman in a robe stepped up to the pulpit and in a booming voice quoted Dylan Thomas, "Do not go gentle into that good night." I was stunned. First of all, a woman in the pulpit quoted a writer whose play I had done, Under Milkwood, when I was in college. Where was I? What was this church? The memorial was very memorable for many reasons, but as a result, several members of the theater joined the church. And then the church reciprocated by buying out one night of our show for every run. By the way, I don't recommend this as a membership growth tactic. This began my long journey with Unitarian Universalism. This was a church who welcomed me and loved me into leadership, gave me a place for all my questions and my journey into my own spirituality. But what am I called to ministry? A few years after I moved from Chicago to Los Angeles, and I moved there because I thought I wanted to take my acting talent further, but I was content working for clients who had businesses in the entertainment industry. I joined a UU church in Pasadena because I realized how important this faith was to me and how much I depended on a UU community for my spiritual grounding. Through all of my time with my church in Pasadena and beyond, I had ministers who encouraged me and urged me to get into district and denominational leadership. This expanded my UU community and gave me a belief that I had a stake in the future of our faith. The question of ministry kept coming up, and I kept pushing it away as ridiculous, until I was sitting in a plenary session at General Assembly one year, listening to Bill Sinkford deliver his president's address, when he started by quoting W.E.B. Du Bois, "Now is the accepted time, not tomorrow, not some more convenient season. It is today that our best work can be done, and not some future day or future year." Before I knew it, I was in tears, and I realized that the call was there, and would always be there. I needed to acknowledge it. So I started to annoy my minister friends with questions. Could I do this? Should I do this? What if I hated it? What if I was no good at it? They were patient with me, but still I wavered. One of my classmates said that she really tried to ignore the call until she realized it was coming from inside the house. Yeah. One morning I was lying in bed wondering what I was going to do with my life when I retired, and ministry popped in my head, and I finally decided the time was right, and I went downstairs to talk to my husband about it, hoping he had some sense and would tell me I was delusional. We sat over coffee, and I told him I thought I needed to go to seminary, but I was probably wrong and too old, and who was I to think I could lead people, and I probably wasn't spiritual enough, and that he should really be honest with me and tell me that he thought I shouldn't do it. I babbled on for a few more minutes and finally stopped talking. He sat there for a minute and simply said, "So, when are you going to start?" Well, that was helpful. So I applied and was accepted, and I've never been happier or felt more at home. In fact, I get so excited by the material that I'm studying that I apologize to every one of my classmates at the beginning of every semester and tell them that they just need to tell me to stop talking, like now. But that urges me to ask you, what dream have you put off or denied because of a myriad of reasons that aren't really reasons? Do you want to paint, run a marathon, climb Mount Rainier, sing with a jazz trio, dance, act? Remember, you're never too old to start. And if you think you are, just look at me. And I've come to believe, after all this, that our best spirituality is built with others, in our community. You are my new community, and I look forward to finding new depths to who I am and what I believe by living this faith that we are walking through together. Not in the litter of what we have been, but in the layers of the heartfelt, hard, spiritual journey we all walk. I'm privileged to walk with you, and I'm grateful for your walk with me. So let us gather this spirit together, and may it be so. Amen.